Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Scale Space. Welcome to Scaling Science. My name is James Groves. I'm Head of Investment Services here at Imperial. For those of you who don't know me, my job is pretty simple. It's basically about helping founders to secure investment. And one of the best ways I can do that is to make sure that investors get visibility and can engage with the fantastic opportunities here at Imperial. So I've been in this game about 15 years, and one of my observations is that some of the best entrepreneurs are those who are not afraid to do things differently, people who are happy to charter new waters and to explore new territories. But of course, the best entrepreneurs are also those who are humble and know what they don't know and know when to reach out to their own ecosystem to ask for support and try and avoid some of the mistakes that maybe can be avoided. So what does the community look like? Well, some of the best people in our community are those who have literally sat in the seats before us, although I appreciate some of our alumni here today. Maybe this building didn't exist when they were here, but making use of your alumni community is a fantastic opportunity to learn and grow from their experience. So it's fantastic that Giant Ventures have worked with us to bring together a fantastic assortment of successful, I think we've called them elite entrepreneurs. I hope they don't mind us using that term. And I'm sure that today will deliver a lot of valuable insights. So I'm going to pass over to Jilin from Giant Ventures.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for being here, especially on a gloomy day. We're delighted that so many of you are excited about scaling science and entrepreneurship. Thank you to Imperial Enterprise Labs and Scale Space for co-hosting this with us. And yeah, a bit about Giant. We're a team of former founders and operators ourselves. We back the most ambitious, purpose-driven founders solving the world's biggest challenges. So we've invested in robots for solar panel installation, AI for novel material discovery, small modular nuclear reactors. Nothing is beyond our imagination. And we're a transatlantic fund, but we truly believe in the ecosystem here in the UK and its potential to continue to find entrepreneurs who are going to build and hopefully scale in the UK these significant venture scale businesses. So we're excited to help catalyze this ecosystem. And as James said, bring together, experienced entrepreneurs who've done the 0 to 1 and 1 and beyond, first-time founders, scientists, innovators, investors, and bring together this ecosystem. So we're going to kick off the evening with a fireside chat between Professor Terry Rudolph, the co-founder of PsiQuantum, and Georgia Ritter, head of marketing at Giant Ventures, and also the founder and host of Out of Hours podcast.
On mute. Yeah. All right. Welcome, everyone. Does yours work? Great. So as Jillian mentioned, I'm Georgia Ritter. I run marketing at Giant Ventures. And I am joined today by Terry Rudolph, who is a professor of quantum physics here at Imperial. Some of you might know him. Some of you might be taught by him. And he's also the co-founder of PsiQuantum, which is a $6 billion quantum computing company on a mission to build the world's first useful quantum computer. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you.
So
it's wonderful to be here, and there's no fireside, which I'm very disappointed by.
Sorry about that. We just imagine it. You're all very smart people, so we'll imagine it. I really wanted to start by, in reality, talking about what is quantum. I don't think we have time to do that. So without trying to plug the book, Q for Quantum is Terry's book, and I really recommend it. It goes through in what he claims to be a 9-year-old's capabilities, how quantum works. And it is really well done. So we won't talk about that. Sorry to disappoint or relieve some people in the room, but we should talk about what quantum does and what it can do in the next 5 to 10 years. I have written here that New Scientist says that quantum will be one of the greatest technological revolutions of our time. Why do they say that? What can quantum do in the next 5 years?
They say that because they got to sell magazines, but I do actually believe that there is a lot of potential for quantum. The underpinning of almost all, even the world's most valuable company now, NVIDIA, is some kind of science. It's chemistry, physics, mathematics. What we do building quantum computers is something that will essentially empower all of those areas. You know, it itself is not just some magical thing that shows up and prints money, but it's something that empowers you in all of those areas. And, you know, much of modern science, I think, you know, if you want to be hyperbolic, you could say the Industrial Revolution itself, it's not a coincidence that it happened when we started understanding the laws of thermodynamics and electromagnetism and classical physics. But we've never really gotten a complete grasp on the laws of quantum mechanics. And so although we have many technologies now which use quantum mechanics, they actually only use the very simplest versions of quantum phenomena, lasers, superconductors, transistors. These are quantum devices that have changed our world, but they're very weak from a quantum sense. They use almost none of the true mystery of quantum mechanics. And quantum computers, you know, the real promise is that we leverage that stuff. You know, we get a handle on it. And when I say we, I don't mean humans. It'll be the AIs that are running the quantum computers. We'll be able to get a handle on the true underpinnings of, you know, the material science, the chemistry, biochemistry, and so on, that we already in the modern day and age, like much of modern society depends on those technologies. And so that's the exciting thing. If you work in quantum computing, it's thinking about almost the stuff that I can't project, because you know, we're trying to build something that will solve, not that it's not going to make incremental changes to things that we currently do, but it's going to empower us to do things that just no one even considers doing today.
I heard someone say that quantum, like AI, is expanding what humans can do, and quantum is just a whole new book. What does that book look like? You know, specifically, what's going to change if you do build this first useful quantum computer?
So, yeah, you know, AI, I think what's beautiful about having experienced that AI, let's say, jump in, you know, for many people, it just came like a train that hit us. It was like, whoa, you know, just did not expect that to happen. But of course, there were people who, for many years, decades even, had been saying this, you know, this is coming and this will be able to happen. And when you've been in the quantum space a long time, you sort of, it's sort of similar. Like, we've been staring this down now since mid 90s of like, hey, this should be possible. But I think for many, at least academic endeavors, and then, you know, the sort of scientific underpinnings of many of the current industries will sort of undergo this revolution of like, hey, stuff that I used to have to go off and you know, spend months doing in a lab and running some experiment, I don't need to do that anymore. I can actually understand this thing better from a simulation. If any of you in biotech, which I obviously don't know much about, but I have a friend who's found that like the ability to solve protein folding problems now with AI has just completely changed everything they do. And you know, quantum it's sort of similar. It's going to change what you do to, you know, not incrementally. It's going to change what you do in a major leap. And yeah, you know, for companies that can be a scary thing because they obviously care about competitors and so on. And you know, we leverage that. We do put fear into them, and they should have fears about, you know, their competitors having quantum computers and them not. But for people on an academic setting, I think it's really a great opportunity to just understand, you know, a whole bunch of stuff in the world of chemistry and material science, and amongst many other things that we just currently are very limited in our ability to understand it. And I wasn't joking when I said it, you know, look, we're humans, whether we really understand stuff or not, ultimately, I don't know, but it's going to empower us for at least a long time to be able to control and manipulate the world around us in positive ways. And that might be AIs doing that, who are going to, you know, train on data produced by quantum computers, who knows.
We'll come back to some of the more revolutionary and scary parts of quantum that you need to be aware of, what people need to be aware of when building it. But let's talk a little bit about your journey. You know, we have a room full of people, half of which are thinking about starting companies, some of which have started companies. you obviously started a company when you were a professor, almost 10 years ago. Tell us about the journey of deciding to take this research and turn it into a company.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking out, there's a lot of people who are much younger than me and much younger than I was 10 years ago, sadly. And yeah, sorry. And so I should, give that disclaimer, which is, my journey was very random. I was not born to be a founder of things, and there's one company in me, and if this one doesn't work, then I'll go back to academia. So, I wouldn't want to give advice, based on what I've done. For me, it was, it came out of academia. It was academic research for a long time. I thought I would just be, an ivory tower academic. Like that's what I liked to do. I loved interacting with the students and so on. And I had a fairly big research group. And thinking about applying quantum mechanics to real world things was just a small amount of what I was doing in the quantum space. And I'd even sort of given up on it at some point. And then I had one PhD student who dragged me back to it. I'd sort of done some stuff and then left it and was doing some other things. And that student said, no, I really want to think more about this. And then it was this was Mercedes. She was a CDT student in the CDT here at Imperial. And, there was a lot to do with the luck of, having a student that wanted to think about it, to do with some just sort of breakthroughs in the types of technologies that we need in order, so that the approach that we take really relies on certain types of abilities to build in silicon chips ways of manipulating light. And those sort of breakthroughs started happening around that same time. And so there was this sort of, confluence of things which are, we're going to think about the abstract theory, but then, we'll have a look at what's going on in the industrial world and see, is there any chance that that stuff could be leveraged to actually build a quantum computer? And I also had a really good postdoc at the time. He was an experimentalist, but also a good theorist. He's one of my co-founders at PsiQuantum. And so it was very much a kind of fortunate, this confluence of things that worked out. But it still was quite a while before I thought, okay, I'm really going to do this and throw myself into it full time. And some of that was just the inability, we realized we needed a lot of money. We realized we were not going to get that from a government. My co-founders were charging around trying to raise money, and they didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, well, someone's got to be sensible around here and help these people talk to investors. And so, for me, it was not something that was ever a passion of mine. Like I never had this vision of, oh, I'm going to be a founder of some, company. It just happened. And it was extremely interesting. And every year when you're, every single year you think, well, this could be the last year because, you're staring down fundraising and technological challenges and just all sorts of things. And every year I sort of looked at it and I was like, well, it's been a wild ride and I've enjoyed it and I've learned a lot. But if I have to go back to academia, I'll be a lot more calm and peaceful and, I'll be quite happy. And so far that hasn't happened. So here I am.
If people are sitting in here and they're thinking they're really on the cusp of being like, I love academia, I don't really want to leave it, but then I can really see this turning into a company. Were there any decision-making frameworks or any key inflection points that made you decide to take it out of the university and build a company?
So, I think for me, obviously a bit different because I was already a fairly senior academic. Yeah. But many of the people at PsiQuantum, in fact, there's probably 14 or 15 former Imperial students, postdocs at PsiQuantum. And those are the people who they were very good, and they had a choice of, do I go into academia? And obviously, quantum at least is now a big thing, and there's a lot of quantum companies, but we were really one of the very first startups. There was probably were the first startup in the quantum computing space, or very close to the first. And there were big companies like Microsoft and Google that had quantum teams. And so for those young people, or then young people, they're still young people. That really was a leap of faith, and I'm actually, you know, far more impressed by them and the courage it took for them. You know, I always like could go back to academia if not here somewhere, and for them they really took that leap of faith, and it's
By the
better
way-
to do it when you're young before you have lots of other things. But you know, I think that they like me saw that there's just no way to do such a massive, expensive thing within the framework of the confines of government funding. And so,
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing that they should keep in mind. Anything else that I'm just for people thinking really kind of umming and ahhing about what to do? Are there any other?
Well, I think if you think you can be happy doing anything other than academia, you should do that, because there's so many challenges with bureaucracies, and you know, especially in Europe where academic salaries don't reward you, the pension schemes have gone to hell. I mean, you really you got to be fairly bloody minded to stay in academic, and if there's any time to do it, it's when you're young, right? Because you have so much more energy, you have so much more ability to learn new things, you have so much more creative power, and so it really is the time to do it. Is if you think it's even vaguely possible, then you should probably do it.
Mic drop moment there. You stayed, I think, in stealth for 6 years. Is that right?
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly. What was the decision to stay in stealth? Was it really difficult staying stealth? And would you advise it?
Well, it was difficult to stay in stealth because, yeah, it's, you know, especially as you're growing, you're doing a lot of stuff and you're trying to hire people, you know, it makes a lot of things more challenging, hiring in particular, because people don't know who you are, you know. So there has to be reasonably good reasons to do it. And, you know, you can argue about whether or not or 6 years is a long time to stay in stealth, but it certainly at the beginning allows you to not get distracted and not have to keep feeding a hype cycle. And you know, once you have a Twitter account, someone has to monitor that thing and start putting stuff out all the time, you know, and this is just the way it is. And if you're in something where you know that you're still far away from customers, then what really are you gaining by going out there and having all this kind of marketing stuff? Investors don't care about it. You can find routes to them through other ways. And what investors care about is, you know, they all have their own ideas of things, and you've got to be good at tapping into that. But what they certainly don't care about is, you know, the sort of very day-to-day news cycle. Just doesn't matter. And so we were very happy. We made that decision, allowed us to really focus on what we were doing, hit a bunch of milestones. The other thing is that if you're in something which is deeply technical, it takes a long time to get results that you want to really shout about, right? And so if you end up in a situation where you're having to make noise about stuff you don't really feel enthusiastic about because you're like, this is still just like a small step towards something else, then you're also just setting yourself up for failure, essentially, and not being able to maintain that kind of enthusiasm and hype, as it were.
Yeah, useful. I wanted to talk a little bit about investors and speaking to investors. I know that you said you weren't the primary kind of fundraising person of the company, but obviously you were involved. One thing that I heard you say on another podcast was that you gave this book, and again, not plugging the book, but the book is good, but you gave the book to investors saying, you know, if you don't understand quantum, read this and maybe it will make it a bit clearer. What else did you do to explain what is such a difficult kind of technology to understand to just generalist investors?
Yeah, man. The variety of investors is just incredible. Like, and the things that they, you know, the background knowledge they come with, the things that they think they know but they don't know, you know, but you have to work out that they say they know but they don't know it, and so on. Like, it's just it's something. I really think there isn't a one size fits all for anything. Like, you're going to need to have a separate slide deck for almost every investor, and you've got to spend quite a lot of effort to work out what is it that they really care about. You know, do they, you know, some of them they care about IP, others are like, IP is just nonsense. Like, you know, other, just their backgrounds. They're so biased by their own experiences. Quantum computers. Well, it's a computer. Oh well, because Microsoft was a software company and they ate Intel's lunch. Why would we invest in a hardware quantum computing company? Some software quantum. They're just like, this is nonsense, right? Like everyone is just biased by their own sort of interpretations of the history of technology and investments and so on. But you're trying to get you've got to get on the same page as them one way or another. And sometimes you'll succeed and sometimes you'll fail. And sometimes you'll succeed, but they still won't invest. And sometimes you'll think you failed and then they'll suddenly pop up with some money. And, it is hard to predict that. But I think really listening and trying to understand what is it that they want reassurance about. Like they have something in their mind that will cause them to sort of flip to being, let's say, skeptical to being positive about you. And that really changes. And yeah, for some of them, they thought quantum was cool, but their understanding of quantum mechanics was extremely poor. And you're having to bite your tongue while you like hear things that are just, completely wrong.
What's the craziest thing?
Oh, I mean, the craziest thing actually that I wouldn't was like John Fry, who is like the billionaire owner of Fry's Electronics, was like, well, yeah, okay, he actually helped us a lot. He introduced us to a lot of people. But he's like, I want to send you in a plane on one of these parabolic orbits, and we're going to build one of these photon entanglement generators, and we're going to try and set it up. But then I want you to come up with a way to destroy the crystal that made the photons before the photons get detected. I'm just like, what is going on? He had some crazy idea about like entanglement. And, you just got to sit there and go like, I don't think that's going to work. And I'm not going up in a plane and building these experiments is like very time consuming. We're trying to raise money in the, so there's quantum already, as you know, probably attracts a lot of alternative thinkers. Let's put it that way. So, and you're going to meet some of those if you're in the quantum space for sure.
Yes. All four of you are scientific founders, and sometimes investors will talk about, wanting a commercial founder. What do you think? I guess there's two questions. Feel free to answer either. What do you think makes a good founder and a good scientific founder? And what do you have to let go of as you move from kind of academia to being a founder of a company?
Okay, so. Yeah, so let me focus on just the sort of the first, to start with, this thing about, you got a whole bunch of academic founders, and at some point you have a real company. And at that point, you really have to know, are we the right people to run this company or not? You're going to start hiring people to help with things, whatever it is, everything from an office manager to whatever. And but yeah, that I think is a difficult decision because, especially if you're a scientist, you don't want people who don't really understand what you're doing to also be controlling everything going on in the company, right? But at some point, you're going to need, particularly if you're an academic scientist, you're going to need the experience of someone who's run, big teams of people. Our COO came to us from Seagate, like the hard drive people, and ran a team of 10,000 engineers, right? Now, I can't run a team of 10 PhD students, right? So you need the right people, and similarly on the business side, you need people who have the right experience, but you're also going to have to realize that you're going to have to let go of some stuff, and they're not going to have the deep understanding of things. You're going to spend a lot of time educating them. And it can be very difficult to sort of let go of things or put up with what you might think of as suboptimal decision making. So that is just you're going to have to do it. It's a balancing act, and it really is important. Whoever those first non-academic hires, but who are senior people in the business are, those are really the most critical hires you're going to make. And I should say that, in our experience, some of the people who were the right people for you when you were 10, 15, 20 people are not the right people for you when you're 100, 200, whatever it is people. We have 500 people now. So yeah, you just got to be prepared for all of those kind of changes. Just in terms of, as an academic, for me, academia was a grab bag of stuff. I did research in many different things, many different areas, lots of fun stuff across everything in quantum mechanics. And choosing to do a company, I knew that it would be like, no, now I'm going to focus on this one particular thing. And it doesn't have the same freedom in some ways. There are other things though. If what you're doing is scientifically interesting to you, you will have other advantages that you don't get in academia. One is, of course, is just resources, but the other is that you'll build a team of people who are also singularly focused on the same thing that you are. And in academia, it's not really like that. Like your students and postdocs, they kind of work on different things, but it's not like everyone is benefiting from everyone else's success. And so, whereas in a company, particularly if you're a company with like one thing that you're trying to do, everyone benefits from everyone else's success. And so you have this, this really super additive feeling of like everyone is trying to help each other make progress in whatever it is. And particularly in the early days, before a company is sort of 50 odd people, everyone's got to be prepared to do anything, understand everything that's going on with what everyone else is doing before you can sort of even divvy up the work properly. You've got to have this feeling of a singular mission. We're all going for this one thing. And then as time goes on, people will fall into their sort of natural teams and roles. But it's still very different in the sense that you're very focused on still one goal. And academia just isn't like that. And so, there's strengths and weaknesses, and for you personally, it may or may not be the right thing. But for me, that's been the biggest difference is switching to just focusing on one thing all the time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because in your book, you come across just so in love with the magic and awe of science and the kind of almost like the inability to answer the questions. And a company is much more focused on getting to the answer as quickly as possible, especially with quantum computing. How do you find that enjoyment, and how do you balance that kind of awe and curiosity with the kind of very execution focused mindset you need to build a company?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my role in the company is still very scientific. So I still spend most of my days, I don't even manage a team. I spend most of my days, doing calculations, simulating things, looking at what other people are doing, trying to make sure that what they're doing makes sense scientifically. So it's still stimulating in that way. I don't, like some of my co-founders, that's not true. They what they do is fundraising and investor relations and talking. I don't think I could be happy doing that. It's true that the quantum mechanics I do is a much more limited subset of the things I used to do and things I understand. But I have really gotten a very, very deep, there is nobody who can tell you how photons behave in silicon waveguides like I can. It's just one of those things, you become a very, very, very deep expert in this kind of one thing. And that's also been interesting because, in academia, what happens is you do a PhD, you're a deep expert in something. And then as you get a bigger and bigger group, it's kind of like your students and postdocs become deep experts, but you're running around chasing money or whatever the heck it is. And so for me, it's almost been like going back to being a PhD student and really getting in and trying to understand stuff very deeply. And that's sort of been fun. And as you get older, you almost wonder, do I still have the ability to do it? Because, mathematics and physics it's like being an athlete. When you're young, you're quicker and faster. You're not as wise. You don't know how to trip the other person up, but you can do it faster. Now I'm wiser and I am slower and maybe not quite as creative, but I have a lot more experience. And so you find that right balance, and it has been fun to see I can actually still do those do the hard stuff sometimes. So I'm slower, but I can still do it.
Yeah. We'll open up to questions in just 1 minute, one final question, which is just thinking about this room again of PhD students, and thinking about your experience working with PhD students and what kind of hangs them up where it shouldn't. What are their limiting beliefs? Where are they holding themselves back? Is there any message that you would want to share with this audience, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So, well, okay. In the UK, PhD students own their own IP, or I'm not sure exactly what the rules will be because I guess it probably depends a little bit on how you fund it. And I think IP can be a bit of a hang-up for people and beginnings of companies and so on. Like, really, it's so difficult to get something going, and if someone really wants to screw you over IP-wise and so on, I just think they'll do it. And so I think there was, particularly, with myself when I was young and various things, you kind of thought all the value was in the idea of something, but really the value is not so much in the idea. There's lots of smart people out there. The value is really your ability to understand and analyze, can you actually turn this thing into something real? And it's just some people have a talent for that and some people don't. And so, yeah, as a PhD student, you come up with some great thing, some great ideas, think about protecting it and trying to get help with it, but really try and get some people around you who have complementary skills who can help you take this thing forward, people who really are different. My co-founders, we're all academics, but, the other three were sort of experimentalists and engineers with different expertise. And I think that kind of thing of, worry about that kind of thing and don't worry about like the pure academic idea, which is kind of what you originally think is the most valuable thing. And this is not just from me. I've seen many, I've other students and postdocs who have set up their own companies and other things. And I really see it's the same for them as well.
Great advice. I think we have time for one question. Is that right? Does anyone have a question for Terry? Oh, yes. You want a mic? Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much for the talk. This is a very wild question, but do you think quantum biology can ever really take off?
You mean in terms of
perhaps like recreating a molecule inside a body? One of the things I know is that you need very cold temperatures to achieve these quantum states. Biological systems by nature are warm, noisy, wet.
Yeah, so if you mean quantum biology in the sense of can we, do I think that quantum mechanics is necessary to explain consciousness or certain things in the body? No, I'm skeptical of that. Obviously, all of chemistry is quantum mechanics, so at some level, understanding quantum mechanics better and with bigger systems and more strongly correlated systems and so on, it's always going to be of relevance to biology and biochemistry. But yeah, I don't think quantum bio, or at least what some people mean by quantum biology, is very plausible. No.
Thank you.
Great. I think that's all we have time for, right? Thank you so much. What a great talk.
Thank you, Terry and Georgia. I'm now joined by a fantastic panel of founders and operators who have scaled their companies from 0 to 1 and beyond. I think we're quite unique in that we have a Series A founder, a Series B, and also a pre-IPO kind of operator that's built a company from 0 to, yeah, I guess pre-IPO. Very exciting kind of milestone. So Ana Luisa is the founder and CEO of Imply. They're developing the world's first continuous hormone monitoring platform. Glenn is the founder and CEO of Basecamp Research. They've built the world's largest biological database. They'll tell you more about that. And then Simon was a founding team member at Hinge Health, a digital health unicorn that was last valued at $6 billion and just filed for IPO not long ago. So all of you were Imperial alumni, or are Imperial alumni, and did PhDs and masters here. How did you make the transition from academia to, you know, building and leading some of the most promising companies founded in the UK?
All right, I'll take the first stab at this. So yeah, compared to everyone else who's sat on stage, I'm not a founder, and so my journey is a little bit different, I guess. I was mid PhD, and it kind of became clear to me that like I wasn't that good at this, right? I was never going to be an academic as good as Terry, and there was also a bit of, I guess, dynamism I felt that was lacking, at least in the area that I was working in. And so I started looking around different areas. It wasn't very obvious to me like how I would join a startup, right? Like to me at that point, my mind was like, I either need to be a founder myself and have this great idea, or I need to be a software developer and go and like join a startup and code for them. The route to meeting the founders that I ended up working with is a bit of a long-winded one, which I won't go into here. But ultimately, I think what I was doing at that point was just kind of positioning myself, like taking whatever opportunity I could to put myself in a possibility of meeting folks who are founders, who are starting something interesting, and seeing how I could get involved. And so that's how it kind of came about, that I started doing some part-time work for these founders who were working on something completely different at the time. Really enjoyed what they were doing. And to Terry's point about the that dynamism and camaraderie around having a small group of people working on a single clear goal, like that was, for me, was just a completely different thing that I hadn't experienced before and was really addictive, right? And so it's clear for me that like that's the route that I wanted to go there. And you know, it wasn't a straight line. There was pivots. We nearly failed a number of times, but yeah, that's kind of how my path started, I guess.
Testing. Hello. Great. Nice and loud. So my route started doing my PhD here in Tom Ellis's lab, and I should give a great shout out to him because he really helped us in the sense of giving me a ton of freedom and space to do a bunch of other things other than my PhD for most of the PhD, which was very, very helpful for me. And one of those things that we did, which was with one of my best friends at the time, was doing a lot of expeditions and taking things like DNA sequencing off grid and just playing around with these new technologies that were coming about. So in 2019, we were the first team doing fully off-grid DNA sequencing, and we were really struck by how much new biology you could discover with some very rudimentary sequencing kind of expeditions that we were doing. And it was just a curious question at that point, really. We just started digging a little bit deeper and realizing that, you know, the public databases around reference genomes and genetics are incredibly limited, and it just felt like this crazy problem. And I think we're actually in a hot tub in the Lake District, if anyone wants to know, discussing this and realizing that, you know, back of the envelope, or we didn't have an envelope because it was wet at the time, you know, but if you had an envelope, but you'd write on the back of it that actually creating this enormous database of new genetics would not actually require a crazy amount of work. It would require a couple of tens of millions of dollars and a bit of time. And we thought we could do it. So we didn't really know venture capital was a thing at that point, if I'm completely honest, and I want to be frank here. So we just started talking to people. We were like, well, maybe we do this in academia, maybe we join a company, maybe we, I don't know, just like synthesize some money out of nowhere. and then we met a few VCs and got talking and got realizing that, hey, there was like a route to very scalable access to capital that could mean we could do this program that we were thinking about in an incredibly fast timescale that we couldn't replicate in any other way. And it just felt very compelling at that point to just go all in and quit everything and hand a PhDs in and move on to that. So we did, and here we are.
Yeah, my journey was a little bit more unusual. So I had left academia. I finished my master's degree and wanted to start a startup and listened to my parents' advice, which was interesting. Was no, go into industry, learn something, and then you can always come back to it. And so that's what I did. I went into the life sciences industry. I worked there for over 10 years on different startups that we spun out, a scale up that we grew from 16 to 350 people, which was great. And then really wanted to get back to what I really wanted to do in the beginning, which was look into a company that I wanted to found. Came across implantable sensor tech, did my own research in my own time with my own money about it, met my co-founder who was still at Imperial, who I knew, and we decided to do this together and venture this journey.
I love this about kind of startups, which is everyone has such a different path. And I think it's something that you don't know. It's just sometimes people stumble into it and you didn't even know that venture capital existed, for example. When you come to the kind of like nitty gritty of then, building this startup and capitalizing the business, which is something that I think many people who are still in universities I think, VCs need to do a bit better job at being less opaque, but there is a lot of unknown. So would love to hear your thoughts on what was it like to do that first fundraise and what do you wish you knew then that you know now about that experience? Maybe Glenn, we'll kick off with you because you didn't even know what VC was at the time.
Well, a very quick lesson we learned quickly is you can pay lawyers after the fundraise, not before. And we didn't use lawyers for our first round because we didn't know that you could do that. So we just wrote our own legal documents with a lot of YouTube videos and Googling, and it works. I wouldn't recommend it though. In terms of sort of things I guess we wish we knew. We were doing silly things like going on a VC's website and it says like, upload your deck here, and we check things, and it turns out they don't check anything. Like it's all network driven. So go out there, come to events like this, meet other founders, and just really just talk to as many people as you can. And something we didn't make this mistake, I don't think, but I see a lot of other people making the mistake is just talk to everyone about your idea in a ton of detail. Like Terry kind of mentioned this a bit, like we're so worried that IP is so locked up, and if you told someone a secret, suddenly they would just like start up this whole other company, and that does happen in very edge cases. But the more people you talk to, the more iterations you're going to have on the idea, the more feedback you're going to get. You're going to meet people, and what the Valley does really, really well is these introductions, right? You just be talking to someone in an event, and they'll say, hey, here are the 5 people you need to go and speak to, and it will just happen automatically. And it's just ingrained in that culture. And here we don't have that, right? It's very closed off. So I would just say open yourself up to a network, talk to everyone about your ideas, and just see where it takes you. And inevitably it will end up at something valuable and some useful connection. I
would echo that. The one thing that I think I worked in the non-academic space, but what I didn't realize is, so I had a really set idea. I had my business plan written. It was all beautiful and well done and so on, but nothing ever happened the way that any of these plans went. And I think it's dealing with those kind of uncertainties, those changes. They might be political, they might be kind of environmental, they might be anything like that. And finding good solutions is much more important sometimes than having a fully fledged plan that goes till 2035 and gets you there. Sometimes it's just going to these events. Meeting people is probably one of the most important part, and not shying away from taking a risk, I think, is also really important to say. Sometimes we're like so worried about things, but sometimes it's not that important to worry at all. It's just more important to just go out and do it, and sit there and get back to it, and don't feel discouraged if it doesn't work out.
That's really helpful practical tips. Maybe Simon, when you answer the question, because Hinge Health is a very much transatlantic business. So did you see any differences when talking to investors in Europe versus the US? And how did you go about talking to European VCs about an American business ultimately?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we saw, maybe it kind of feels a little bit cliche, is that speaking to investors over here, there was quite a bit more interest in You know, what's the IP around this? Like technically, why is this different, or like why are you unique here? Whereas in the US, it was much more, okay, so like what's the size of the opportunity? How quickly can you grow this? And like, how do you scale? What's your sales motion? And so I think, yeah, I'm just gonna, to Terry's point, understanding who you're speaking to and what they are interested in. But yeah, that's kind of I guess a difference we noticed.
Yeah, maybe double clicking on your fundraising experience. You know, there's the story, the tailoring based on the US versus European investors. But similar question that Terry answered is you're building quite scientific businesses. So how do you get the balance right of when do I give enough information so that they know that my technology is rigorous and it's differentiated versus like keeping it high level enough because VCs are meeting 10, 20 founders a day and they just have to context switch and they just can't follow you. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I'm happy to go on this. I mean, maybe just for context, I should explain my sample size here is just from 4 fundraisers and $85 million so far. It's my first company, so as in I don't have like a
very
long
successful
sample set
fundraise so far.
But maybe one mistake I feel like a lot of people make is a VC's input is not technical. You're not looking to them to solve your technical problems. That's what you do. That's your job. You're looking to them to understand the wider market, the landscape, like the macro events that mean this will be an incredibly successful and large company. And so the screening we've used to get to the right investors is, can we get a conversation to a point where we're not talking about the technology per se, we're talking about the bets we're taking on the world and how we think the world will look and what assumptions need to come true for that to be the case. And then at the end of all of that, are we positioned in the right way from a technology standpoint or market standpoint or whatever it is standpoint that lets us capitalize on that opportunity should all those assumptions come true? And like, that's the best kind of conversation we find that we can get to with investors, because at that point they understand all the risks with the company, which are effectively those assumptions fall flat. Very hard for them to assess, like, is your technology differentiated in these like minutiae that you as an academic care about? At some point they're going to have to take a risk that you have that covered, or they can talk to lawyers or whatever, they can outsource that if they want to. But trying to obsess over finding like technical fit with VCs would be my maybe counterintuitive advice, and really look for like philosophical alignment, I think is more important. At least we found that personally. And that's very different across the pond. Maybe just to touch on your US, UK or US, Europe split. It's very natural with all US VCs that we've met, at least, that like that's where the conversation just naturally goes to. And we found with European VCs, although I would say that's changing, and I assume Giant Ventures are on the right side of this, like really shifting, where there's a lot of amazing European investors who do think a lot like the US investors, who can take that conversation into those kind of big bets on the world type of view, rather than the minutiae of a business model in 36 months that may or may not come true.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And maybe Anna-Luisa, when you answer the question, would love your thoughts on, you know, there's many applications to continuous hormone monitoring, but maybe many use cases are in women's health. And often VCs wrongly kind of pigeonhole certain ideas, or it's actually very underfunded. So how do you deal with those challenges when you're talking to investors and help them understand the broader potential of what you're working on?
Yeah, it's something that we go through the motions every time we speak to an investor. That's I haven't found the kind of golden ticket to that one, because every investor thinks completely different about your tech and its possibilities. And sometimes if we go too far, the investor will kind of back off and say, "Oh, that's a little bit too far for us." And sometimes if we don't go far enough into explaining our vision, they kind of, say, "Oh, this is quite boring. It's already been done. You don't need it," and so on. So I think it's good to find a middle ground, know who you're speaking to, and know how the conversation goes. And it's kind of back to the level of flexibility you have to have when you're on a call. Really understand who you're speaking to and what interests them. Because if you start going off onto a script and you just script it down and you just go with that, you're going to miss all the opportunities that lie in between, where they could like this and they could like it, that version of the story, and where you want to drive the business and where you want to go with your innovation. I think that specifically for us, we chose IVF treatment as our first market. For many VCs, that's ultra niche, but for us, it's a $2 billion, attainable market. It's not niche. And so it's going about explaining exactly why you got down to that decision making. And actually a big unlock was for us to plan for the second iteration already. So we started planning for where we're going to go after IVF, which is the menopause, and started unlocking kind of commercial impact on this. And that unlocked everything because people saw not only step 1, but they already saw step 2, which allowed them to see step 3 and 4. And that actually helped a lot to overcome this.
Yeah, I think the kind of like going on a script and, you know, I have to go through my slide deck is a classic mistake that we've seen, and, you know, keeping it conversational always works. Another kind of key hurdle for especially many deep tech or science-based founders is actually commercialization and go-to-market, and thinking about that sooner than later. I think it's easy to fixate on an idea or the solution, but actually maybe not think soon enough about how do I actually turn this into a business. I mean, Hinge Health has notoriously done this really well on the go-to-market side, but would love your thoughts on, you know, what are some practical tips and tricks to think about commercialization? When is it the right time to talk to customers? You know, there's always a balance of going too early and then you disappoint them because you don't live up to what you've sold them, but then going too late and, you know, you just haven't had those conversations early enough. So would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for Hinge Health, for us, the early stage risk was never really about the technology, which might be a bit different to a few folks here, but more about whether there was actually a market for what we foresaw. So, you know, if you're not familiar with us, which you probably aren't, we started about 10 years ago with the thesis that, you know, rather than going to see a physiotherapist every time you have joint and back pain, well, actually your physiotherapy can be delivered remotely, and we can leverage what was at the time novel technology of kind of commoditized sensors and mobile devices to kind of digitize the physiotherapy experience and put it on your phone, put it on a device that we ship to you. And so for us, our go-to-market was, well, first of all, we need to figure out who would actually benefit from this. We kind of did a bit of the classic thing of, well, maybe it's a bit more common in this audience, in this setting, but starting with a product or a solution and kind of looking for a problem, which, you know, traditionally you shouldn't be doing. But we had this idea and we thought that this should exist in the future. The problem was, how do we get there? And so for us, the early stages were a lot of quick experiments and bets on different potential go-to-markets that we thought could work, you know. And I think what was important for us and why we ended up being successful in finding the go-to-market that worked was that we did try quite a few different approaches and we did iterate through them quickly. And, you know, at a point where you've had a few meetings with such and such a company and they're like, oh yeah, let me pass you on to so and so, you realize no, we're this isn't going to work, and move on. And there's a whole different side of things of which, coming out of science, how do you find the right people in an organization to be speaking to? And it's not just one person about finding the right person. It's finding that one person, then whoever's going to sign the check, and then whoever's needs to be that internal champion for getting your solution bought. There's a whole lot of that was a lot of figuring out in the early days, and something that I think, at least for me and for the early team, that wasn't something that we'd ever had any experience about. And so there's a lot of learning on that side of things early on.
I think that ties in really nicely with the fundraising journey. And like you said at the start there, realizing, are you trying to de-risk something in the market, or are you trying to de-risk something in the technology? And always be conscious of specifically what you're de-risking at any moment in time. If you're trying to de-risk something in the market, I mean, obviously go to the market and try to commercialize what you're doing and find that, iterate around go-to-market stuff. And you're going to disappoint people, and that's fine. That's kind of feels like the point of it. if you're existing in a purely technical risk world, like don't go to the market with something that literally doesn't work. I mean, that's just not going to go well for you. So I think just be conscious of what you're trying to do. And that's something we didn't necessarily do really well in the early fundraising days, which was be really specific with people about like what aspect of the business you've de-risked and have turned into a lever that you turn into a capital problem. Like if the technology sort of is, you've proven the first inch of it working, and then scaling it up, you understand what it will take to do it, it just becomes a capital problem. Or you understand the first inch of the market and how they're going to respond, then it becomes a capital problem of how you scale it up. Like those are, I think, some of the ways we've thought about it, at least. And we've made a lot of mistakes on this front, right? I mean, we've gone and built tons of partnerships with people that have just failed completely, and we kind of we've definitely learned a lot in that process. But I had underappreciated how unstartup like every other company is. So when you do something with them and it doesn't work, their intuition is not to come back to you and say, let's do more, which we kind of assumed it might be. Their intuition is to say, well, it doesn't work then.
How would you even avoided those mistakes? You know, like, I think the challenge is sometimes you're like, well, they are talking to me, they are scheduling the next meeting, they are signing this partnership, and then, you know, it's 12 months, 18 months, and you're like, damn, that was a waste of time. That results to nothing.
Yeah, I think
how do
you,
you,
the first thing I said there, like we were trying to de-risk our technology in the market, and I think that's not necessarily the right approach in the early days. So now we only go to the market with something that's pretty much solved on the technical front. We know it's going to work for people. We're just trying to work out what price point does people care about this at, and how broad a market can we get into. And at that point, it's a market risk question. So I would love to believe there is a world where you can de-risk your technology in the market, and that was definitely my view at the start. Cynically, I don't think that necessarily is the case. Unless you're selling to other startups, I think then it probably does work, because they're of a similar mindset of like wanting to iterate with you rather than just testing it point blank.
I think it's so specific to one's own business, and I don't know how many of you here are in the really early stages of founding a business or thinking about it. I remember that the first 3 months, and I had loads of commercial experience. I'd put $1 million deals together and so forth. But it's the same. I felt the same, as it didn't matter really. The first 3 months, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to even conceptualize and how to make these de-risking moves even happen. And sometimes when I go back to it, I feel like we had to go through it all, because otherwise we would have never ended up where we were. So I feel like you're going to have to go through the pain. And that if that means disappointing people, that means disappointing people. If that means trying to de-risk in the market and see if it works, that means that, even if it might not be true, it led you somewhere. It led you somewhere. You didn't stop doing anything. And sometimes this relentless just doing something at some risk front will lead you into the path that you're supposed to go, or not supposed to go down, but that you want to go down, and that will lead you to a commercial fit, because all you're trying to do is find a product market fit that enables you to build a business that makes returns, right? Like we build businesses because we want commercial return for what we do, either by selling a product or a service. And so some route will get you there. You just sometimes have to do trial and error on that front. And I'm always of the notion, speak to as many people as possible. We've had research projects fail. We've had partnerships not work out. We went through all of COVID with a kind of hardware product, and we made it through. Some of those were great, some of those weren't great, but you learn along the way. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Well, I mean, I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot myself, and I would have loved to have some of these like really great tips as I was kind of at a startup myself. But there's also a lot of noise in startup advice. I don't know if you experience that, and it's quite hard to pick out like the signal from the noise. You know, some VCs are telling you this, other founders are telling you that. What are the most like practical tips or advice that you have for maybe some of the people who are thinking about joining a startup or starting their own company that has been most, useful for you in terms of increasing your odds of success at the early stages of building a company?
I love the irony of like, should you listen to it? Like, no, you shouldn't listen to any advice. I don't know.
Actually, well, the one thing I do say to founders is it's always great to meet other founders. I think they're definitely more useful than VCs, must admit. Founders that are maybe a couple of steps ahead of you who've made those mistakes, right? But yeah.
And maybe just to quickly answer on our front, like I think it's something you said there, just do stuff and talk to as many people and just keep doing that over and over again and form your own worldview. And there is no like recipe book, and it's not like, yeah, we had great advice from other founders and we sort of did exactly that and it panned out exactly as we predicted. But speak to as many people as you can. Just be out there in the kind of world, get as many opinions as you can, and then kind of inform your own view of what you do and don't take forward. And just do stuff, like be really busy. And the more decisions you make and the more things you do on a short time frame, inevitably 1% of those will be correct, and that's the 1% you need. So just get moving and get talking. Yeah.
It's really important to take advice, actually. I think it's one of the most, the fastest way you can propel yourself and progress, but you really need to make sure that the person that advises you, or the advice that you listen to or you take and so on, is actually appropriate for you. So it's about thinking really critically about what someone is telling you, and making an analysis of it that works for your own business, and an analysis of the scenario. So we still have advisors. We have an awesome advisory board. They helped us get through thick and thin. Without some of them, we wouldn't be here anymore. I think those are important, rocks to build when you're building your startup. Through that, I do think that not all the advice we had was valuable. We spent a lot of time following the wrong advice. But then how do you know it? It ultimately it will happen. So you need to get used to accepting your own failure in so many ways and forms and shapes, and that's okay. That we learn from that.
Yeah, and I think when you put together your go to market and figure out how you're selling and what the ecosystem looks like, chances are that you might have an innovative, novel product, but actually, the ecosystem largely exists. And so there's no need to reinvent the wheel around things that kind of already exist. So for us, when we were going to market, we had a new product, digital physical therapy, and we were going to sell it to large employers in the United States. But people have been selling to large employers in the United States for decades. And so there's this ecosystem around that, consultants, health plans. And so for us, you can, the shortcut there is just speak to people who understand that ecosystem as much as possible. There's also people that want to be helpful, but maybe actually aren't that close to it or haven't been that close to it for a while and may not provide you that useful of advice. And so that's just something to kind of look out for. But yeah, understand kind of what's novel about you and, what's not novel about how you're going about it. And, don't try and reinvent the wheel for the stuff that's not novel, right? Learn from other people who've done it before.
Awesome. Do we have time for questions? Yeah. Any questions? Thank you so much. This was incredibly useful. I hope everyone agrees. But yeah.
Building that company, or should we be expecting, obviously it's company specific, but feels like maybe a macro trend of investors not wanting to invest in bigger later stage rounds? Like, what do you guys think?
I think that it's really important to think about what you want to do with the business. It took me a long time to think about that. I think it's a difficult decision, but if you want to go and exit your business really quickly and that's what you want to do, then that's something to follow. If you don't, then if you want to build a bigger business, if you want to maybe have, for us, it's, I want this technology on the market. I suffer from polycystic ovaries. It's really important for me that we have better diagnostic tools. I don't necessarily, unless I'm pushed into it, want to do that. But then it's every founder's journey. And I think it's really going inside yourself and saying, do I want to build a business that I exit after 3 years, or do I want to build a business that I grow and create impact and so forth?
Yeah, I just think it's so important to find investors that fit you and what you're trying to do and not the other way around. Like, you're not building a company for those investors, because I love you guys. You guys are great, but you're fickle creatures and you know, move with the markets, and that's understandable. That's their job. But you know, you're going to be doing this through multiple market cycles, most likely, or at least one, and therefore, you know, having investors that come and go with that tide is going to be damaging. So, yeah, have high conviction in what you want to do, and then you'll find the right investors over time.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Mileage will vary depending on, you know, the technology in your product. I think it's always good to try and bias towards shipping early and learning, and that might not be necessarily doing it for, like, I guess there's different ways to get the product out there and start getting data and that can be useful later commercially. You know, for us, we didn't have the, as I said, the technical risk wasn't really there, but from a commercial perspective, no one was really interested in whether they were, what buyers wanted to know and what investors wanted to know was, like, does this actually work, right? Do people get better if they use your product? And so for us, it was like, okay, what's that first question? How do we answer that? How do we provide that information to get us to that next milestone where a buyer might take a punt on us? And so then for us, it was like, okay, well, we need to find our first users, and they're not going to pay us for this. We're going to give it entirely for free. We're going to have to do a lot of legwork to find these folks. But that's what we need to do to get us to that next milestone. So I'm trying to like map when we had some residual funding from a prior fundraise for a different thing that we pivoted and then became what would become Hinge Health. So we had a little bit of money left over, but VCs basically weren't really entertaining us until we'd got to the point where we'd got some patient data, we'd got signed paperwork for launching a couple of pilots with employers in the US. They weren't necessarily large, but there was that demonstration of market interest in what we were doing as well.
And maybe from the VC perspective, I think the closer you are to the customers, the better. So, you know, even if you don't launch a product, you should be talking to your customers. Well, it depends, again, what you're building. But I think we love seeing founders really understanding their customer. So, you know, you can keep waiting until the perfect product is built. But I think the sooner, and again, it's kind of like figuring out when is the right time and when is the MVP that just makes sense to show customers so that you can demonstrate value. But I think the sooner you can demonstrate that you are close to the customer and understand them, the better for your fundraising. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, and the sun's come out a little bit. So I'm going to pass back to James, but please give the panel a big round of applause. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. So that really just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you for all of you for turning up after a day in the lab or a day at work to listen to these guys. I think you'll agree it was incredibly useful to get those insights. I would encourage you to think, actually, if this has been useful, then actually how do you extend that? We've heard about the benefits of talking to people, to talking to the ecosystem. So go, network, listen to other founders, learn from their experiences. So that really just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you to my friends at Giant Ventures, Gillian and Georgia. Thank you very much. Thank you, Terry, for joining us before you head back to Silicon Valley. Bring us some more sunshine next time. Thank you to Simon. Thank you to Glenn. Thank you to Anna Louisa for sharing your expertise. Everybody, please go have a drink, talk to each other. We'll send you an email. We'll ask you what you thought of this event. This was a one-off pilot. If you thought it was a good idea, we'll do more. In there, there'll be contacts for Giant Ventures. These guys will be here today, but make sure you reach out to them if you've got questions about what VCs think about. But thank you very much. We'll wrap it up there. Go and enjoy a drink. Thank you.